Hey, what's up, guys? This is Favi from Tectonic Takes. Just giving you a quick reminder. This is Baby Leo, too. Quick reminder to like our video, please. It helps out the algorithm to make sure that other Quakes fans see our content as well. And don't forget to subscribe. Maybe press that bell icon as well. Take care, and
welcome back to another episode of the Tectonic Takes podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Ivan Ornelas, and I'm here with Alicia Rodriguez. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thank you so much for having me on.
So myself and the rest of our hosts on the podcast are a fan of your work, but tell us a little bit about what you do for the listeners who aren't as familiar.
Sure. Right now I work for SB Nation. I'm basically the California soccer person. So I cover all three of the MLS teams in California, including the San Jose Earthquakes. And I also cover Sacramento Republic and sprinkle in a couple, 2-3 more USL teams on top of it. So I stay pretty busy, but love doing it.
Right. So not just San Jose, it's all of California, not just NorCal, right?
That's right. So yeah, we have sites dedicated to the Earthquakes, the Galaxy, LAFC, and then, like I said, we also have a site dedicated for Sacramento Republic.
Right. Cool.
So I run all those sites, and so the San Jose one is Centerline Soccer.
Yeah, so the days where I go on SB Nation's websites, whether it's checking soccer or anything else, I could just spend a few hours easily going through all the latest articles and the comments, and there's just an abundance of riches there. If you're a soccer fan, you should check out SB Nation, not just Alicia's work, but there's so many talented writers out there.
Yeah, we have blogs covering most of MLS, women's soccer, Europe, England. So there's a little bit of something for everybody.
Right. I think one of my favorite things about SB Nation is the creative names that a lot of the blogs have.
Yeah, I would definitely say that some are better than others,
right.
But yeah, some of them are very entertaining. Sometimes you sort of wonder, where did that come from? But I think one of the fun things is, for some of these nicknames, you know, there's an inside joke or there's something that really resonates for the fan base, but the whole idea is that it's for the fan base, right? So to an outsider, you may say, I don't understand that at all, but you know, if you're in the community, you know, the idea is you have an idea of what they're talking about or what the joke is, so to speak.
Right. And as in this time that we're speaking right now, we're heading into another MLS season. There's a lot of excitement, but there's still a lot of caution and concern, as right now with the March Madness going on, we just like minutes ago, we heard about Oregon versus VCU getting canceled because of a positive COVID test in Virginia Commonwealth University's program. So that is still affecting March Madness. That's going to affect sports throughout this calendar year and perhaps a little bit beyond that. So despite that, I think we're happy that we're getting another season of MLS. And I think the positive in that is we're not going to take anything for granted. We know how much work was put into the MLS back tournament and the remainder of the MLS season just to get through that finishing line. And I think that adds to the excitement, right?
Oh, definitely. I think you're right in that you don't take anything for granted anymore. You know, we used to say this game's going to be at this time, and you figured it was like clockwork. And I think pretty much at this point, we can't count on anything. We've seen a little bit around, not so much out here out west, but I think over on the East Coast, there's been some scrimmages that have been postponed or canceled because of things surrounding COVID. So hopefully people can stay as safe as possible. I mean, I think it's really a delicate balancing act between trying to keep sports going as much as we can and being safe while doing it. And hopefully this year will be better than last year, and hopefully people can stay safe throughout.
Right. So now we're going to get into the questions we have prepared for today for you, as we've asked several other content creators within the San Jose Earthquakes community. This podcast, as well as all of Tectonic Takes podcasts, is brought to you by Roughneck Scarfs, proud supporter of the Beautiful Game Network. So through the previous episodes I've done with other people, we've sort of nailed down a common predicted starting 11 going into this season. I'll just read it off for you. So we got JT Marcinkowski, we have Abakasis, Youngworth, Alanis, and Lopez as the back four. We have Jackson Ewell and Judson as the center midfielders, with Fierro, Espinoza, Chofis, and Rios our front four. Do you have any alternatives regarding that starting 11, or is that what you expect?
I would say that's probably what I expect, but I think there's a good chance that once again Chris Wondolowski, get kind of bulldozes his way into the lineup, and it seems like it would be most likely he would take Fierro's spot. I think Fierro did come on some last year, and really seemed to settle in MLS finally, but I do also think that that's probably a spot that they're targeting, to perhaps upgrade in the transfer market. So I think if there's somebody who really, should be concerned about his spot, it'll probably be him. Having said that, I think Fierro will probably still get plenty of starts this season.
I think regardless of what team you're in, as an attacker, you're always concerned about your spot, especially if someone comes off the bench, they start scoring a few goals in consecutive games. With Almeida, what we saw last season was when Fierro got hot, he started playing more. When Wando got hot, he started playing more, and that spilled less time for players like Andy Rios. So there's always that concern, especially because if we're back to just the regular 3 substitutions, most of those substitutions are going to be attacking substitutions. So the likelihood of attacking players not playing 90 minutes goes up. So I think those are definitely the spots to look out for. I think some fans are a little bit concerned about the depth behind our back line, especially we've seen Nick Lima is now in Austin FC, for example. So we're going to see how healthy these guys can stay and what kind of solidity we get with this back four.
Yeah, I think you're right that health is obviously something that teams need in order to, be competitive. If you lose very many starters in MLS, you're in big trouble. But having said that, I get the impression that while Almeida, for the most part, really stuck to his guys last year, and even with so many games coming, he like to have a set lineup. I think that the club understands that this year there's probably going to be fixture congestion again, and there's going to be a lot of players going in and out on international duty. So I think they have to be planning to have changes baked into, the coming games ahead, that kind of thing. So like Tommy Thompson, I think is probably still going to get a good run of games, even if, like you said, he's probably not penciled in as kind of a top line starter. As a fullback, he's versatile, and I think he can probably
Swiss Army knife.
Exactly, and obviously he can play in the midfield as well. Shea Salinas, he said last season that he's kind of to an extent grown comfortable coming off the bench, but he's somebody who can also step up in a pinch. And even though he's getting up there in age, he's still extremely fit, and he's been very fortunate in his career to stay healthy. He's somebody that I expect is going to be getting a decent run as well. We have Cade Cowell. I think Cade Cowell is somebody who could be very exciting if he really catches fire this season. So, I think, and Eric Rometti is another one, right? Like they traded for him. It's unusual for the Earthquakes to trade for players, right? They hadn't done it really hardly at all since Jesse Fiorinelli joined the team. But I think he's going to get plenty of run when Jackson Ewell is off on international duty. Judson may get a break finally. He plays a lot of minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Having some rotation, I think, will be good for the group.
Yeah, I think you made a lot of good points. I'm going to briefly touch on the one with Cade Cowell. I think his goal for this season is, because it will be tough for him to get a starting spot, but have opposing MLS defenders fear the sight of you warming up from the bench, seeing your number called by the substitution board, because that's an important role to play, because you're going to be needed even if you're not starting.
Yeah, and he was somebody who, when we saw his debut last season, in a game where the Earthquakes were losing badly. There was nothing to lose. It was sort of like, let's see what this kid can do. He really was fantastic, right? Like he had 30 to 40 minutes and really showed that he was fearless. He was ready for the moment. And we talked to him recently, a couple weeks ago. He said, he wants to be more productive. He wants to get more goals on the season. And I think that's a good goal for him to have, because he already has that, this sounds kind of strange saying it, but he has a man's body, right? Like he's strong, but he's
a big boy.
Yeah, he's physically mature, and he can kind of go toe to toe with MLS defenses. It's just a matter of, can his progression continue? We saw some really great signs last year. Can he keep going, or is it going to be a little more of an up and down trajectory as he's getting used to really fully becoming a professional? And we can't really say at this point. Hopefully it's all upward trajectory, but if he has a couple bumps along the way, that's part of the process. But hopefully he can, like you said, if it's a bench role and he's somebody that he can be another super sub on this team, that's going to be really fearsome indeed for this club.
A few bumps along the way. That sounds the Earthquakes motto.
For sure.
Yeah, and one last thing I wanted to touch before we get into the next question is player absences during international duty. I didn't get to see the game against Costa Rica for the Olympic qualifying, but I was so pleased to see Jackson Ewell and JT Marcinkowski get starts. I was even pleased to see Matt Doyle. He was predicting that lineup as well, so it shows that these aren't just players that are getting chances for the hell of it, that these are players that from the community across U.S. soccer, that they're recognizing that they have a role to play in this youth team, and who knows beyond that. So that's exciting as a San Jose Earthquakes fan.
Yeah, in the case of Ewell, I think he had a good shift. The U.S. looked fairly rusty in the game, but that's to be expected because most of them had not played for 6 months or whatever. I think it was a really good sign that he was named the captain. I wasn't altogether surprised about that. I think I was expecting he was going to be a nailed-on starter for this team. I think being the captain sort of shows he's going to be out there pretty much every minute of every game. And he's somebody who I think, even, not to sound bad, but even though he's in MLS and even though he's playing for a club that doesn't get a lot of recognition nationally, I think he's in the wider senior team pool. And that doesn't mean that he's automatically going to get called up for everything. But I fully expect if he has a solid tournament, so he's off to a decent start, he can continue to get call-ups periodically throughout this year at the senior level. Obviously, if they make the Olympics, I would expect, even though everyone is expecting that the talent level of the Olympic team would substantially jump up, I still think that Ewell would have a spot in the team. So that's pretty exciting, but obviously first things first, they have to qualify.
Right. It would be the first qualification since 2008 Beijing, and that's definitely an important achievement to muster up. So we talked a little bit about the lineup. So based on everything we just said, do you think that this team on paper has more talent than last year, less, or around the same?
Well, I would say that Abe Cassis is a question mark. I've not seen him play. He's experienced, which is often good, but you never quite know how a player from abroad is going to adjust to MLS. So it could go great, it could go terrible. Like, who's to say? I think Chofis, there's some question marks around him for sure. I think it was a good risk reward type signing, and I think if he is mentally straight, that should improve the team. And given the fact that most of the starting lineup is exactly the same as it was last year, I wouldn't say that there's any substantial change otherwise. So I can't really say for sure, oh, they're definitely better, they're definitely worse. It's really wait and see. But I think given how the team is currently constructed, it's not substantially different. So maybe a little bit better, but I think we're also waiting for maybe some moves to come down at some point in the season or preseason, depending on when they can get some deals over the line. It would be interesting to see what their next DP signing is going to be. I think that would be a pretty good statement of intent as far as kind of how that person is going to elevate the squad. So yeah, and they didn't really use most of their DPs last year, right?
Right.
Like for most of the season. So in that regard, I think it's pretty similar, but I think Trophies could turn out to be quite good again if he's kind of locked in and is really mentally focused to be with this team.
Right. And I think it's one of those things where you got to remember that no team makes moves in a vacuum. San Jose Earthquakes is one of now 27 MLS franchises fighting for that same goal to lift an MLS Cup at the end of this season. So while San Jose Earthquakes could be improving, and that's definitely a possibility given this lineup, that doesn't mean other teams aren't improving either.
Yeah, absolutely. If usually if you're standing still, you're falling way behind. Last year we saw the Earthquakes did hardly anything, and they got better. But obviously they didn't jump up into a tier of contender quite yet. I mean, I think there were many promising signs from last year, but I think if they were to basically stand pat with Abe Cassis and Chofis as their kind of big signings, that's probably not going to cut it, another season. But yeah, I mean, the indications I've heard is that the club is actively working to improve the roster. So I don't expect them to stand pat like they did in 2020. But yeah, you make a good point. Just because you're making moves and you say, oh, we feel so much better now, all the other teams in the league are absolutely working to upgrade year after year as well.
Yeah, and that's the frustration. Like, it's one thing to accept, yeah, San Jose Earthquakes are going to make roster moves, as will the other teams. But when last season happened, where they made considerably less roster moves than virtually the rest of the field, that's when fans started to get a little bit of that, oh crap, here we go again, another season of mediocrity. And it was a roller coaster, even from the 2-game sample size before COVID, with the thrilling 2-2 draw against Toronto, another heavy defeat against Minnesota, then the highs and lows of MLS is back, and then we start off pretty poorly in the restart, and then make the playoffs. It shows that there's never going to be a dull moment with the San Jose Earthquakes team, and that's a little bit independent on like the transfers that are coming in and out. It's just like the DNA of this team and like the person who's head coach.
Definitely, but I don't want to sort of offer excuses if fans feel like the team is not moving enough when it comes to signings. But I would say that huge slump that the Earthquakes had last season coming out of the MLS's back tournament when they were winless for like 8 or 9 games. I mean, I cannot think of I've covered MLS for like a decade. I can't think of a single example of any other club that would have sunk that low and would have managed to turn their season around that much.
Southampton, maybe?
Yeah, but like in MLS terms.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
It just doesn't happen, right? Like there came a moment where I think we wondered if Almeida was going to be fired last season.
Oh, yeah.
And Jesse Fioranelli faced us after a game and he said, oh, Matias has a really bad headache. And everybody was like, okay, sure. What does this mean? But no, they stuck with him and the team rallied and they came together and they actually turned their season around. And I think, yes, it's a small thing in kind of when you're talking about trophies and that kind of thing, but most teams would have just folded, right? They would have folded. They would have had 10 games to play. It would have been miserable. And the thing that I think you cannot discount from this team, this club overall, never a dull moment, like you said, but they really, that never give up attitude, I know has probably become a cliche at this point, but
Goonies never say die.
They really don't give up. And that's what's really great about this team is they're used to having to fight and scrap to get results. And I think the good news is when Almeida came in, there was already that DNA in the team that, even if it's the middle of the summer, it's unseasonably hot, they're down 2 goals with 10 minutes to play, they're going to fight to get those goals and to tie it up and maybe take the lead. And they do that way more than I think most teams, end up doing it, just because they have that sense of belief. And I think Almeida has really amplified that attitude and helped them take it to a new level. And so in that way, I think last season was really impressive because They didn't fold. They ended up making the playoffs. They honestly should have won that playoff game. That was so disappointing. They played fantastically in that game. But to me, that's the good thing that I think San Jose does that nobody else does, is there is that sense that they can keep grinding and keep working, and we can find a way. Over the years, they haven't always done it, but I think last year was a sign that maybe they can keep building and keep getting better.
Yep, and as we continue this process of building and we're seeing how it's coming together before the start of the season, where do you feel like the squad does still need improvements, if anywhere?
I mean, I think that there is definitely room for improvement. It's a little mix of like, we've seen this group be really us against the world and done well. But having said that, if you're looking at MLS on a wider scale, yeah, they're definitely, the last several years, they've been one of the least talented teams overall. So there's always room for upgrades. I think the big things are looking at getting another starting caliber center back. I think for a variety of reasons, not only to elevate the defense overall, in spite of the inspirational comeback that they had last season, they shipped a ton of goals, right? And that's unsustainable.
Yeah, so many.
Honestly. Yeah, so I think finding another starting caliber center back, having some arrangement where you can rotate around again, I think is good, but I would definitely be looking for another center back. I think with Marcinkowski, for the most part, probably going to be starting this year. I think that's going to be good. I think having a full season of him will be a good thing for the team and should help them defensively as well. And then also they need at least one, probably two more consistent scorers on the team. That's the other side of kind of the improbable comeback that they made. Wando had a pretty good season last year, but as far as like production, really nobody else did. And you can sort of spin that the other way and say, well, everyone, pitched in and that, they spread the
with
around.
assists.
But I mean, they really do need a consistent scorer. They need somebody who needs to get into double digits on a consistent basis. Given the way that the squad is made up, they have a lot of guys who work hard, who understand the style of play, who can battle for 90 minutes, but they need that upgrade in actual production. Hopefully Chofis can take some of that burden. But again, if he's able to score 12 goals, that's fantastic, but they still need somebody else who's also there and able to kick them in over and over again. If not, a couple guys, honestly, they could use to really upgrade. If they can do those things, and I know that that's not easy because those are like the hardest positions to fill, but if they can fill like three people in, between center back and attack/forward, who are true MLS caliber upgrades, then they're going to be substantially better, and I think they can move way up in the standings in the Western Conference.
Right, excellent points. I think I do worry about the center backs behind Youngworth and Alanis, because we've seen some good flashes of Tanner Beeson last season, but if he's going to be constantly that next guy up, if one of them, those other guys, accumulates yellow cards or something, hopefully it's one of those things where like you spin a roulette and hope that game Beeson has to play isn't against Seattle Sounders or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're hoping that they probably just don't have as many games against the Sounders, period, right? Like,
right.
No matter who plays.
We played them like 11 times last season?
Yeah, keep it to a minimum. They probably, like, 2/3 of their goals allowed came from, I think, the Sounders and the Timbers last year. So if they can cut down on the number of games against those opponents, they'll be probably much happier. But, yeah, I think Beeson had a decent season, a decent debut season. But, again, if you're looking at the pure, if you're kind of like, well, it feels like they're doing okay, and then you look at the numbers and you look at the comparisons between how many goals they're allowing and how many goals other teams in the league are allowing, it's like, wow, this is it's a problem. It's, I think it's okay if they're not first in the league in goals conceded, because if their style of play understands that at certain times, they're going to allow bad goals, right? Like they understand that it's part of the system. Occasionally they're going to get totally burned on a counterattack, and that's what happens. I think that's okay, but they can't be leading the league by a pretty decent margin in goals allowed, because then that, I think, is a sign that they just, something is not right. They're not scoring nearly enough. Like by contrast, LAFC also allows quite a few goals, but for the last 2 seasons, they've led the league in goals scored.
Right.
So they also have a similar thing where, even though they don't play the same style, they say, okay, we're going to give up a couple goals in a game. That's not the end of the world. If we score 4, then the opponents can score 2. That's no problem. But they're scoring 4, and the Earthquakes are not scoring 4. They're getting 1 or 2 that they can't let in 3 or 4 as a result. So
yeah, it's definitely not sustainable. Definitely a trend we want to see changing, regardless of where they are in the standings. We just would like to see a small negative goal difference at worst, but ideally in the positives this season. And regarding some individual players, what's one player you're most excited about this season, and what's one player you're banking on will have a comeback season, like bouncing back into form?
I think I'm most excited probably about Marcinkowski really getting a good long run. I think it was pretty clear last year that Daniel Vega is a good professional. I think he's a good guy with the squad, but he really kind of let the team down at times with his goalkeeping. Marcinkowski offered an immediate upgrade, and so having him as the starter, hopefully, like, set it and forget it. There is a chance he could go on international duty as well, but he probably will be around most or all of the season. I would really like to see him just kind of settle in and see how his progression goes, because for young goalkeepers, you need to play games in order to kind of really see where your level is going to be. And I think he was promising last season when he did get a chance. So I look forward to seeing more. And I've already mentioned, but I think Cade Cowell, he's an exciting player, and I think he's somebody who could potentially be very exciting for the Earthquakes and for MLS overall. So I hope that his progression is good. For bounce back, that's an interesting question. Like we were saying, like with the team that's together, I think you can really say, wow, that guy played, really good under the circumstances. Like everybody improved at least a little bit last season, who's still with the team.
Yeah.
I think Marcos Lopez was somebody who I was really impressed with last year. I don't think he needs a bounce back.
Yeah.
But like his first season, I thought he was really weak. Last year, I thought he was really good. I thought he really kind of showed, he just needed some time to acclimate. I already mentioned with Fierro, he had a similar process. It would be nice if Fierro, if he's going to continue to be a starter, that he, really settles in and really kind of turns up the goals a little bit. I'm not necessarily optimistic he is going to become more productive. I think he's probably pretty close to his ceiling, but it would be nice if he could kind of push on a little bit, prove some of the haters wrong, and score a few more goals and really sort of cement his place. Again, if there's not a DP or a couple more top scorers like walking through the door before opening day.
Right. And if the Earthquakes were to make a move later this season, you'd expect it to be more of an attacker, right?
Well, I think they're looking at several positions.
Right.
Jesse Fiorinelli said that they have kind of he didn't come out and say directly, oh, we have a list and we're kind of working through it, but he sort of implied that's what they're working on right now. So I think that they probably have several irons in the fire, and sort of whichever comes up first is what's, what they're going to go with. That makes sense. I would not be shocked if 1, 2, 3 big signings come in the summer transfer window after the European season is done, or I was going to say South American, but that South American seasons are for the most part just running straight through the summer. But anyway, when the summer transfer window opens, he didn't say for sure, oh, we're waiting until the summer. But he said one of the good things about this season is you're going to have played far fewer games prior to the summer transfer window opening, so you have way more like room to work with the rest of the season when you're trying to tweak or fix things or whatever. And then also just the market realities of some players are going to be more available in the summer window than they are at present. So I'm not going to say for sure, oh, nobody else is coming through that door, but it sounds more likely that players are going to be signing in the summer. And so we may have to wait a little while, be a little patient before we see some more faces come through.
Right, and that completely makes sense based on what we've seen in the January transfer window among several European leagues. Even the big clubs had to resort to some loan moves and stuff like that. So it's definitely a wait and see situation, and maybe this summer we'll get another new face or two to cheer on for the San Jose Earthquakes.
Yeah, for sure. And that's part of we're still in a weird time with the pandemic, and that is really causing a ton of havoc on the transfer market globally. I think in some cases that could be to a team's benefit in MLS, and in some cases it's going to be to their detriment. And we've seen in part, so far this offseason, preseason, there's been hardly any DP signings around the league. One reason is because of the pandemic and just the uncertainty, teams losing money, teams getting, a lot more greedy, wanting to make more money off transfers, that kind of thing, because their bottom line is affected a lot more now. So we'll have to see how it shakes out. But yeah, the global conditions are certainly making the transfer market different, in some ways better, in some ways worse than what we normally see.
Right. So there's a lot more transfer speculation to come throughout the year, as is the case with MLS. So now for a different kind of speculation, as in where you think the San Jose Earthquakes would land in the Western Conference standings, and if you'd like to also mention a few other Western Conference teams you think could be threats to the Quakes regarding their position at the table you expect them to be.
Yeah, it's really hard to say at this point, and I'm not trying to kind of get out of answering the question, but
I understand.
The thing is, we don't have a schedule, right? We only know of, in the case of the Earthquakes, 3 games so far. Right. I mean, I have, again, if they play like a really regional schedule where the West Coast teams are all playing each other over and over and over again,
could be trouble.
It's kind of a bloodbath, right? Like, last season, the Galaxy were really bad. LAFC were far worse than I think most people expected. The Timbers were all over the place. The Sounders were extremely good. The Whitecaps were really the only cannon fodder, amongst that West Coast group. And San Jose were kind of in the middle. They made some real inroads last season, I think, against some of those tougher opponents. But like, that's a really, really, really hard group to have to play game after game after game.
Plus a couple of the Rocky Mountain foes, Real Salt Lake and Colorado Rapids.
Yeah, I mean, good thing the RSL was in that mix, because the Takes did really well against them last year. So we're pretty happy about that. I think it sounds like either we're going to get like half the schedule and then the league is going to, sort of reassess, kind of like the NBA did, or they're going to make it more national. I mean, we already saw that the Quakes have a game in Houston, so there's going to be some movement, maybe a little more travel.
They got one in Austin as well.
Yeah, there's going to be a game in Austin. So we'll have to see if there, going to be any games against the Eastern Conference for the West Coast teams. But so yeah, all of that is to say, if Western Conference is only playing in conference, I think that also makes a difference, because I think there's going to be, a lot of good teams in the West, and there may be a few more cannon fodder teams in the East. And so that's going to throw things off a little bit. Having said all of that, I think the Earthquakes have to feel bullish about coming into the season. Again, they haven't had much turnover. The players who left for the most part were not key contribers, aside from Lima. They've got the same group. Like, I think that cohesion is going to go a long way for them. And other teams have had more turnover, more changes in the off season, more injuries to deal with, and so I think they have to like their chances, but it's still going to be tough. The likes of, I think LAFC is probably going to bounce back if they can stay healthy. I think the Galaxy are going to improve. I've definitely learned at this point not to count out the Sounders in any season whatsoever. So it's going to be another a tough season regardless. But I think there's reason for some optimism for the Earthquakes.
Yeah, I'm thinking right now, a lot of the teams that are the usual suspects that make the playoffs are looking like they're in good position to do so. Seattle Sounders, Portland Timbers, and also throw in Minnesota and Kansas City into the mix. They're always steady eddies, but I think if based on what we know so far, what I've seen regarding the plans for the season, where it's looking like 7 from each conference will make the playoffs, we're trying to get into a more normal type of scenario. I think Earthquakes might have to, I'm not going to say settle for 7th because we want to improve, but 7th place wouldn't be a surprise.
Yeah, I mean, I think coming into the season, they're kind of in that range for sure. And I think it's worth noting too that their margin of error is far less than for other teams, right? Mm-hmm. We've talked already that they have built a little bit of depth in a few spots, I think, in the offseason that's going to help them. But they still don't, if you take out, if Carlos Vela misses 3 months for LAFC, Diego Rossi is still winning the Golden Boot, right? Like there's not a similar situation for the Earthquakes. So they kind of have to get it right on the first try or else. And so that makes it in some ways more interesting and in other ways a lot more risky for San Jose, just because they just don't have a margin of error. If they really hit a skid, we have seen them turn it around, but you don't want to get reliant on turning things on when it's time to really get serious, because you really can't do that too many times.
All right. Based on that previous answer, I'm going to try challenging you with like your gut feeling. What would be your gut feeling MLS Cup matchup as of right now for this next season?
Okay. I mean, I haven't even really been thinking about the East so much. One of the problems I think coming into this season is because of the pandemic, teams are far more secretive than usual.
Right. So, like, cards close to the chest.
Yeah, like you really don't even get that much information. Let's see. I'm gonna say for the East, let's go for Philly.
Okay.
Bold, I know, because they've lost a couple really key players, but I like what they've done.
They're greater than the sum of the parts individually.
Yeah. Yeah, they're like Eastern Earthquakes, right? Am I right? No. And then for the West, I mean, again, there's a lot of really good teams in the West, but let's say LAFC. Let's make it a new one.
LAFC versus Philadelphia Union. Okay.
Yeah, new MLS Cup champion. I think it would be a really great match. And they both play some really interesting soccer. So yeah, I mean, I think people would get behind a matchup like that, but who knows? I'm sure that's going to be totally wrong, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I recently wrote for MLS Multiplex about the top 5 longest MLS trophy droughts. Philadelphia Union possibly could have been in that list if they didn't win the Supporters' Shield last year. So I think that would definitely be an interesting matchup. 2 teams that are knocking on the door. They've won Supporters' Shields. They've made a lot of solid improvements on and off the pitch, but they haven't gotten that MLS Cup yet. So they're going to be hungry this season.
Yeah, that's kind of what my thinking was too. And of course, that's a pretty easy narrative, but both clubs have been building over time. They have a good core together. They have a coherent style of play. Their manager has been in place for a long time. So there are the conditions for it to have, it's conceivable, but of course, at this time of the season, anything's conceivable. We could see Austin against Cincinnati in the MLS Cup final for all we know at this point.
Is that your tectonic take for the 2021 MLS season?
Definitely not. I would put no money on Cincinnati. They really have to turn things around before I put any sort of positive predictions their way.
Luciano Acosta MLS Cup MVP.
Wow. I mean, that would be a wild season if that happened. Right. Wow. Up is down, day is night, that kind of thing.
So, yeah. That is the last question though I do have for you. If you had a tectonic take for this season, what would it be if you...
Wow. I don't know if it's really a tectonic take because they got so much better, but I think, okay, how about this? I think Orlando City is going to continue to get better. They did improve substantially with Oscar Pareja in charge. He's a proven coach. Okay, that's not such a surprise. I think Inter Miami is going to struggle a lot. They made it to the playoffs in their first season fair and square, right? They qualified. But it's one of those like, okay, like
top heavy roster.
It's one of those where technically they made it to the playoffs, but can we really say that they were a playoff team last season? I don't think so, right? Like, yes, officially they made it to the playoffs, but unlike the Earthquakes, who I know are in a similar position, the Earthquakes actually took the 1 seed to the absolute brink in their playoff game. Like, they proved that they belonged in the playoffs, right?
Right, penalty shootout.
Yeah. Inter Miami rolled over, in the play-in game. Like, they were awful. I don't think that they really should have been a playoff team. I think they're going to struggle this season. I think Phil Neville has a lot of unearned confidence.
That's saying it lightly, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that they're going to hit some bumps. So, yeah, it may be a season full of drama in Miami, which would be entertaining for us neutrals, but it may be a little bit rough to watch on the field, but we'll have to see.
Right. On the opposite side of that Inter-Miami coin, you had Nashville. Like, no one had any expectations for Nashville. Inter-Miami were the ones who were like, oh, wow, look at all these flashy players. You got Pizarro, you got Higuain, you got Matuidi. Like, wow, they're going to do shit. Like, but that wasn't the case. Nashville, though, led by Walker Zimmerman, Defensive Player of the Year, they definitely look like a solid team that they could be a dark horse.
Yeah, Nashville, I think, has problems with goals, but they are much more steady, right? Like, they're much more solid and kind of the traditional, build from the back and then worry about the attack last kind of approach. And it worked great for them, especially in 2020. I think it was kismet for them that they had the pandemic. I'm sure that they never would have wanted to launch in a pandemic season, but on the field, I think it really worked out for them because I think it played into their approach perfectly. And I think they made the playoffs too, but I think that they deserve to be in the playoffs. I think that they showed that they really could hang in the West. They weren't a Cincinnati, they weren't a cold basket case to start off. And so I think that they have a platform to build from, but it's going to be interesting to see where the goals come from this season for them as well. But yeah, they're steady. They're steady so far.
All right. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Alicia. I had so much fun. I hope you did too, and I know the listeners did have fun. A lot of great points were made, and your wealth of knowledge is apparent, and it just makes me excited to see the future work that you do for this season. You always do a great job, so thanks for coming on and sharing that with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I don't get too many opportunities to talk about the Earthquakes, but I loved it, so thank you. I've really not that I didn't want to cover the Earthquakes, but starting out the daily beat, I wasn't sure what to expect, but I absolutely love covering the Earthquakes. So thank you so much for having me on.
So we know that you're with Centerline Soccer on SB Nation, right?
Yes. And you can find me on Twitter at Soccer Musings as well.
All right. So there we go. Go give her a follow on Twitter. You won't be disappointed. You can follow me on Twitter at Ivan Ornelas 2, or you can follow the Tectonic Takes podcast at Tectonic Takes on Twitter. And that'll be all for today. Go Quakes. All right.